Welcome to Protecting Project Pulp, part of the District of Wonders network, featuring Starship Sofa, Tales to Terrify, and Crime City Central. Everyone has a story in the District of Wonders. Come and find yours. Psst. Hey, you. Yeah, you. Come here. You know what this is? No, it's not a shakedown. Relax. This, my friend, is issue 9 of Protecting Project Pulp. Now, each week, these guys, they bring authentic pulp stories from back in the day and put them right in your ears. For free. Can you believe it? Who, me? I'm your go-to guy. They call me Dave Pipes Robinson. So, look around you for a sec. Look at all these happy, smiley people, huh? Going about their business, buying groceries, going to work, taking their kids to a ball game. It's a real pretty picture, isn't it? Well, let me tell you something, Squire. That ain't the half of it. All that sunshine and light, it casts shadows. And in those shadows, there's a whole different story being told. Greed, lust, desire for something that ain't yours. Now, some people just can't keep their hands out of the cookie jar, you know? Some people think they can take what they want, that might makes right, and whoever's got the gun makes the rules. I ain't saying it's right, I'm just saying it is. There's folks who think that the world should be a better place, and they lay down laws for what's right and wrong. That's a good thing, right? Sure. And you got police to make sure those laws stick. They try and bring the light into the shadows. All that does is make the rats scatter. Sometimes making something right and doing the right thing ain't the same thing at all. It's a fine line to walk, and we got a story about a guy who walks it all the time. The story's called Live Bait by Hoffmann Price. Now, this story first appeared in April of 1934 in a magazine called Alibi. Hoffmann Price, now there's a character. He set out to be a career soldier. Graduated from West Point, served in World War I, saw action in Mexico and the Philippines. He was a champion boxer and fencer, an amateur orientalogist, and studied the Arabic language. Sci-fi author Jack Williamson described Price as a real-life soldier of fortune. He wrote for everybody, from Argosy to terror tales, from speed detective to spicy mystery stories. His byline was a regular thing at Weird Tales, and he was right up there with H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, and Clark Ashton Smith. In fact, Price collaborated with Lovecraft on Through the Gates of the Silver Key, and he was the only pulp writer to actually meet Robert E. Howard face to face. He stirred up some trouble in his time. His The Stranger from Kurdistan featured a dialogue between Christ and Satan, and as you might imagine, some people criticized that as blasphemous. But it was popular with the readers. The Infidel's Daughter was a satire on the Ku Klux Klan, and that got some Southern readers a bit riled. But hey, he stood behind his story. Price was an icon of pulp fiction. He was one of the first speakers at San Francisco's Maltese Falcon Society in 1981, and he received the World Fantasy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1984. He called himself a fictioneer, and I'd say he lived up to that moniker. And then some. Now, your narrator for this tasty bit of crime pulp is Stephen Howell. Steve grew up near Tampa Bay, Florida, but currently lives in South Carolina with his wife and 2 sons. He's a 22-year veteran of the U.S. Army and an aspiring science fiction author working on his first novel. He plans to retire from military service next year to focus on writing. Other than recording bedtime stories for his kids from dusty combat zones, this is his first narration, and it won't be his last. Okay, grab a drink and check your morals at the door. It's time to walk that line between light and shadow and figure out just how far you'll go to make something right.
Live Bait by E. Hoffmann Price. Davis P. Barrett's mother, who had died when he was 6, doubtless thought that he was a beautiful child, but then she was his mother, and something like 30-odd years may have changed little Davis. Mrs. Barrett's youngest son's face was now the rock of Gibraltar, done in that shade of bronze which comes from long exposure to the breath of blistering deserts and tropical jungles. His broad mouth was a thin, straight line, no wider than the edge of an officer's dress sword, and somewhat harder. His blue eyes glowed with ominous volcanic mirth as they watched 2 perfectly barbered, tailored, and manicured gentlemen whose tables were at the corner of the tiny dance floor and to Barrett's left. The 2 racketeers were inseparable friends. They had assumed, somewhat erroneously as it later developed, that their being at Club Martinique was pure coincidence, and they had agreed to combine their tables when their feminine companions arrived. A waiter was bringing a note to the gentleman whose table was nearest Barrett, Guido Pichetti. Barrett's shaggy reddish brows rose just perceptibly. His chin, which he fingered abstractedly, was thrust forward. There was something tense and expectant about Barrett, as though he were a panther about to spring. His interest seemed centered on the note, rather than on the perceptible bulge of the left breasts of the nicely fitted dinner jackets of Messrs. Pichetti and Spud Malone. Club Martinique was a mirthful madhouse of blatant music, alcoholic laughter, and tinkle of ice against the sides of many tall glasses. White arms and shoulders, and whiter shirt fronts, stared spectrally through the bluish glare of the spotlight that made the shifting bands of smoke seem like phantom serpents writhing in the warmth of a ghostly sun. The reek of gin, perfume, cosmetics, and unextinguished cigarette butts was the odor of gaiety to most of those assembled, but to Davis Barrett it was the exhalation of death and the end of a story. Guido Pichetti had opened the note, his swarthy features flushed with rage, then bleached sallow as he leaped from his table. What he said to Malone, and what Malone replied, was not audible above the blare of the music, but Barrett's expectancy was not in vain. There was an almost simultaneous flashing of hands to shoulder holsters. Barrett's lips relaxed, enough to reveal a glimpse of his teeth, as 2 pistols blazed into the satanic bluish moonlight, and their roar, almost a single prolonged report, bellowed above the brazen clang of the orchestra. Barrett ignored the ensuing uproar and confusion as a glance, before the crowd became too dense about the fallen, assured him that the theretofore bosom friends had killed each other. He sighed deeply, slouched against the back of his chair, and for the first time realized how highly keyed he had been for the past half hour. Justice that was beyond the power of the law. Vengeance, and the end of a story. A burly, red-faced, grim-mouthed man emerged from the gaping, babbling, hysterical crowd that pushed in as close as it could to the double X's that marked the respective spots where Guido Pichetti and Spud Malone had become public benefactors. In his hands, he had a letter and an envelope, both of which he thrust before Barrett. "Dave," he demanded, "what do you know about this? One look tells me as fishy as kippered herring, even if Damon and Pythias were too dumb to realize it." Barrett regarded first the envelope, then the letter, then John Healy, chief of the Detective Bureau, who was beginning to understand why he had received a tip to be present, though unseen, at Club Martinique. "The end of the story, John. It's been a strain figuring out ways of making these rats kill each other." Healy grunted, nodded, and then said, "Pretty good, Dave. Only it's not the end of the story by a big damn sight. You've not finished something, you started something. Watch your step." Mrs. Barrett might have been right, some 30 years ago. Her lean, broad-shouldered son, while far from handsome, in his lighter moments had a pleasant smile and an engaging, friendly manner. "Thanks, John," he said quite affably as he rose from his seat. "Come out to the house some night soon. I have some mighty interesting jigsaw puzzles." And a few moments later, Barrett was at the wheel of his Isota, driving up St. Charles Avenue toward Audubon Place. He was smiling to himself at the gullibility of two dear friends whose lurking suspicion of each other had been detonated by the note Barrett had prepared and planted. 2 days later, 36 hours to be accurate, Barrett's smile vanished. What he had called the end of a story had become the beginning of a longer and grimmer tale. His blue eyes were hard as sword points as he paced up and down the wine-red Bukhara rug in his library. "Marie?" he demanded abruptly, as he halted and faced the girl who sat buried in the depths of an overstuffed chair. "Are you sure Lee hasn't just left town suddenly on urgent business?" Marie Simpson shook her blonde head and dabbed her tear-reddened eyes. She had never learned the art of effective weeping. "No, Dave. He'd have wired or phoned me by this time." She swallowed a sob, then said pointedly, "And I don't think you believe he's left on a business trip either." Burnett's features tensed. Vengeance was bearing bitter fruit. "Suppose you run along home," he suggested with a gentleness that seemed out of keeping with his rugged features and the usually incisive snap of his voice. "You know I'd go through hell and high water for Lee, and if there is anything off-color about his being missing for the past 12 hours, I'll tear the roof off." As he spoke, he helped Marie Simpson with her coat. "Dave, do you think—" "I'm not thinking anything," he evaded. "But I'm going to see. Now run along. Pull yourself together." As the door clicked closed behind Marie Simpson, Barrett's eyes flashed to the half-opened desk drawer. During the brief interview, he had feared that his very effort not to think of what the drawer contained, not to let his eyes stray toward it, would betray him to Marie's intuition. His hand halted midway as it reached for the envelope. "Jackass," he said aloud. Healy was right. Barrett's bitter thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of John Healy. He indicated the chair that Marie Simpson had left but a few moments ago. Or how long had it been that he had stared at that desk drawer? "What's new and good, John?" "About Lee Simpson, and it's not good," said Healy, as he selected a cigar from Barrett's humidor and jammed his bulk into the spacious chair. "You're his #1 friend. Where is he?" "God knows," replied Barrett, "and I will if I live long enough. Has his wife—" "Run me ragged," interrupted Healy, "but no sign of him. Where do I come in?" "Simpson's not got 2 nickels to click together," answered Healy, "and no enemies. The way I got it doped out, somebody's getting at you for that job you pulled at Club Martinique. Somebody took a tumble." Barrett flinched as at the thrust of a red-hot poker. "Right, John. I'd rather face a machine gun than this. Don't worry, you probably will before it's over. Have you gotten any demands for ransom or the like?" Barrett shook his head. "You a damn liar," declared Healy with the license of friendship. "Have it your own way, and if you've any dope, pass it along. I'm on the job myself." "No good, Dave," said Healy with a peremptory gesture. "That's the trouble. You've been on the job too much. You smoked out so many of these rats, and now they're pulling your teeth by snatching Simpson." "My teeth," countered Barrett, with an ominous glitter in his eyes, "aren't pulled yet. I want you to keep your hands off. None of your men follow me around when I take the warpath. Will you give me a break? Stand clear?" Healy saw Barrett's glance shift and linger on a rack of firearms that made the library look very much like an arsenal. "Sold." "Thanks, John. And remember, I've got my reasons for playing a lone hand." Upon Healy's departure, Barrett reread for the 20th time the letter he had received that morning. "Bring $20,000 in new, unmarked $100 bills to the main entrance of the Crescent Compress Company at midnight. If there is any sign of police interference, or if my men do not report by 1 a.m., we'll ship Simpson's head to join his finger. Come alone and unarmed." There was no signature. None was needed. Jake Maroney had made a final counterattack that would not fail as the others had. A small parcel which had accompanied the letter bore witness that the enemy meant business. It contained the fourth finger of Simpson. The blackened nail, recently crushed by a hammer tap, identified it beyond any doubt. Barrett knew that the demand for the ransom was camouflage. Maroney had based his coup on the friendship of Simpson and Barrett. He knew that Barrett would willingly and knowingly walk into an ambuscade for the sake of Simpson. "That son of a," muttered Barrett as he thrust the letter back into the desk. "Using live bait." He grinned sourly and added, "I'll do the same." At about the same hour of that same morning, Jake Maroney was holding high court in his armored office in an otherwise deserted warehouse near the riverfront. Maroney's swivel chair was a throne, and his well-tailored suit of imported worsteds was the imperial purple that had slipped from the shoulders of his predecessor when the muzzle of a 25-3000 reached through a loophole in a brick wall and snapped a tiny slug through a pistol-proof vest. In front of Maroney was a mahogany desk, entirely suitable to an executive whose payrolls were as great as those of the city and whose revenues were greater. At his left was a gaudy Japanese screen that added to the grotesquerie of the crude office. The screen, however, was no evidence of the house beautiful. It served a useful purpose. The center of one of its painted chrysanthemums had been neatly cut out with a knife. Maroney's swarthy features smiled unpleasantly as his dark eyes bored coldly into the pudgy, evil-faced ruffian before him. "Orders are orders," he declared with ominous evenness of tone. "I don't give a damn," exclaimed Maroney's lieutenant and commander-in-chief of the Praetorian Guard of hopheads and assorted assassins. "Tinkering with Barrett is like boxing with a tiger. Shaking him down for 20 grand to save Simpson's hide is one thing. That's easy. But trying to grab Barrett when he delivers the check is plain foolishness." "Mm-hmm," breathed Maroney. His snake eyes flickered to the right. He seemed for an instant to be peering through and past the thugs who sat on a bench along the wall. "Carver, are you man enough?" A tall, rangy fellow, whose bony features wore a warped, perpetual grin, fidgeted for a moment with the brim of his hat. His glance switched from Maroney to the lieutenant on the carpet, and back to Maroney again. "Geez, that ain't a fair question," he protested. "I'm working for you, but I'm directly under Schwartz. You know," he made a gesture of resignation. Discipline," murmured Maroney. "Yes, discipline is splendid." Then he snapped a question. "How about you other punks?" The other two on the bench startled, frowned ponderously, nodding and rubbing their chins as though a portentous decision was on the verge of birth. The atmosphere of the tiny, soundproof office became electric from the tension. "Yellow from your backbone to your belly," crackled Maroney. "Just like this slob." The slob on the carpet flushed. "Who's yellow? You—" His hand made a swift gesture, but it was not fast enough. A spurt of flame poured from the loophole of the chrysanthemum. As the pudgy lieutenant reeled crazily and collapsed, a pistol appeared in Maroney's hand. The three along the wall kept their hands rigidly motionless. "You guys give me a headache," said Maroney pleasantly. "Mike, Otto, get the hell out of here while I talk to Carver." As the pair left the office, audibly sighing at their relief at dismissal, Maroney beckoned to Sam Carver. "I've been fed up with him for a long time. You got guts enough to take this job?" Carver swallowed just once. "Sure thing. Only I'd like to know just what you want done." "That's the talk," approved Maroney as he replaced his pistol. "When Barrett shows up tonight, I want you birds to nab him, tie him, and bring him to the Carlotta, and I don't want you to croak him." Sam Carver frowned perplexedly. "Geez, that's a contract. He's a fighting fool, and—" He saw Maroney's eyes shifting speculatively toward the man who lay on the floor. "But I'll make it." "But it won't hurt to tap him on the nut just to keep him quiet without really hurting him?" Maroney nodded and smiled thinly. "Just remember that a dead man can't sign an order for 50 grand. But after we get the dough, Carver grinned. Sort of double play, huh, Miss Maroney? Right. And just a bit of advice, Sam. You've been getting too friendly with my secretary. His voice was low, confidential, and alarming. Honest, I ain't done. I didn't mean a thing. Just being friendly to Miss Arredonda. Maroney stroked his bluish jaw and smiled affably. I understand, Sam, but it just don't look right. She's nothing to me at all, only I got you, Mr. Maroney. Carver hastened to assure his chief. Okay, and no slips tonight. I'm counting on you. 20 grand and Barrett in shape to sign an order for 50 more, and then we'll have no more phony letters and civil war. Despite his chief's warning, Sam Carver phoned Norma Arredonda, and after being assured that the coast was clear, called at her apartment. He came to the point at once. You and me are strangers from now on. Positively farewell appearance. Norma was dark and shapely, and lived up to the exotic ear pendants she affected. Her full lips were red as a saber slash against the transparent, creamy pallor of her skin. What's the matter, Sam? Her delicately penciled brows rose in Moorish arches. Maroney set on rubbing me out, Carver explained somberly. That Barrett job. You have been buying me too many drinks at Club Martinique, mused Norma. So I've heard, and here I am. Still, resumed Norma, I think you're heated up about nothing. Barrett has been on the spot half a dozen times, and each time he's beaten it with a surprise party of his own. And when he pulls a dumb one, his luck saves him. I'm scared of that guy's luck. He's a hoodoo, and he's filled a private graveyard with mugs that tried to get him, snatching his best friends like spitting in a tiger's eye. Norma shook her head. Wrong, Sam. Him and Simpson are old buddies. But if you don't return by a certain time, it's Simpson's head. He knows it. That's going to make a Boy Scout out of Barrett. I don't care if you're supposed to make a good Christian of him, countered Carver dolefully. I'm being framed, just like Dutch. Carver checked himself abruptly, swallowed, said nothing. Yes, murmured Norma. Nothing, snapped Sam. I'm doing this job, and I'm going to the country to raise chickens. There's no percentage. He reached for his hat. Norma stopped him at the door. Since you're not going to see me anymore, she said, you might at least kiss me goodbye. You're a good egg, Sam, and I hope you get the breaks. Oh, just a minute. He paused as she scribbled an address and a telephone number on a slip of paper. Call me here once in a while, but disguise your voice. Someone might be listening on an extension. Don't say too much, just enough so I know you're thinking of me. He's got his guts trying to keep you from even being friendly in a nice way. Bye, Sam. Norma was part of the dictator's intricate web of evasion and espionage. While terming her secretary was perhaps a shade too figurative, hers was an important part in Maroney's system of seeming to be in several places at once, and proving it by answering from one point calls to half a dozen offices. Norma was much of the brain of the organization, but Norma was, after all, human. That night, Barrett dressed very deliberately, as though for a dinner engagement instead of a rendezvous with kidnappers. Damn your hide, Amos, he said reproachfully as he regarded the tie that his white-haired, old-colored handyman had laid out. Do you think that goes with this suit? Yes, sir, Mr. Dave. I think it's just gorgeous. Barrett was content with the amendment submitted by Amos. As he adjusted it, he fondly regarded the Colt .45 that lay in his dresser drawer, and regretfully shook his head. That black scarf, Amos, he said abstractedly, as he detached a gold penknife from his chain. He took the scarf, snapped it several times, whip-like, and all the while one eye half closed. He pondered as though considering a hitherto unweighed element of the evening's dangerous work. Barrett finally knotted the penknife into the corner of the scarf, then stuffed several pockets of $100 bills into his pockets. Amos, he said, here's the key to the Ford. In case I don't come back, you can have it. The old man's eyes widened, and his black face lengthened. Why, Mr. Dave? He sputtered. Stick around and watch the phone, said Barrett, and you don't know where I've gone, not even if the president calls. Yes, sir, Mr. Dave. and ain't nothing gonna happen to you. I wish, reflected Barrett as he took the wheel of the heavy sedan that was next to the Ford coupe, that I could be sure Amos is right. Barrett parked near the corner of Munn and Chapatula streets. Even by daylight, the vicinity seemed to have been blighted by a lurching vengeance that had doomed to failure the warehouses and ship's chandleries that line the riverfront. Munn Street, 1 block long, but it may take me the rest of my life to reach the end of it, was Barrett's thought, as he sought to accustom his eyes to the blackness. The moon was still so low that the shadows of the buildings on the right blended with the black bulk of those on the left. He shivered as the penetrating wind bit like a bayonet. Barrett drew his top coat about him. His fingers, grasping the lapels, touched the hard silk of his scarf. One concealed weapon, anyway. A gold penknife. If he had brought a pistol, he might be tempted to use it, and thus surely kill Lee Simpson, as well as the one who received his fire. God, but it's dark. Barrett was used to the haunted blacknesses of Asiatic jungles, vibrant with the silent slinking of the eater in search of the eaten. Yet Munn Street, which led to the river, was shrouded by an obscurity more malignant than any he had ever penetrated. Barrett shivered again, but this time not from cold. He smiled, and his gait became fluent as that of a hunter. Barrett forced himself to consider the moment at hand, rather than the other life which hung in the balance. It was his fault that Simpson was in danger, and his duty to extricate him, regardless of the cost. 20 paces into the darkness. Then someone emerged from a doorway and said in a low, decisive voice, "Stick 'em up, Jack." But it was the muzzle of a pistol that someone else jammed into the small of his back that gave force to the command. Barrett's hands rose. "Now, back into this doorway. Mike, frisk him, right now." Deft fingers went through his pockets. There was a mutter of satisfaction as Mike drew out 4 packets of bills. For an instant, the beam of a tiny fountain pen flashlight winked at the numerals that marked the denomination. The reflected glow, however, revealed more than the direct light. Barrett noted that his captors were not masked. It seemed to make no difference to them that Barrett had in that moment's elimination seen enough to identify them. There was an unavoidable conclusion that Barrett had to draw. Unless he could convince himself that his captors had been careless and had not realized that Barrett would ever afterwards recognize them. "All right, fellows," said Barrett pleasantly. "You got your money. Now where's Simpson?" "Ain't that a hard one, Sam?" chuckled the one who had searched Barrett. "Simpson is in a safe place," came the reply, "and you're coming with us. Think we're going to turn you loose before this money's been checked to see nothing's phony?" "Reasonable," admitted Barrett. "I'll sort of be taking Simpson's place, so you can turn him loose right away." "Uh-huh," grunted Sam, apparently pleased by the prisoner's ready acquiescence. But to Barrett, the arrangement was confirmation of his first suspicions. "Mike, tie this bird," commanded Sam. "Lower your arms, you, but don't try any funny work." "How's he going to climb down to the boat if his hands are tied?" wondered Mike. "And that Jacob's ladder up the "Shut up, you boob!" snapped Sam Carver. "Grab that cord." "Oh, what if he does?" countered Mike, then checked himself. But that slip sufficed to assure Barrett that he was destined to board one of the many abandoned ships, wartime-built merchant marine, moored along the opposite bank of the river. The secreted penknife might enable him to cut his bonds, but a doubt had risen in Barrett's mind. Would Simpson be released, now that the ransom had been delivered, or would he be executed as part of a reprisal? Barrett's captors were indifferent to future identification, and that could betoken but one thing other than gross carelessness. A desperate scheme crystallized, and in an instant Barrett made his decision. Sam, pistol in hand, was a blur in the darkness a yard ahead. Mike was fumbling in the gloom at Barrett's left, seeking a coil of rope. Surprise can work wonders. Barrett felt the enemy's assurance, and hoped that they did not sense his own. Barrett's fingers closed on the end of the scarf about his neck and dragged it clear. They thought that he was unarmed, yet that folded square of silk was a silent, instantly fatal weapon, which was invisible in the darkness. As Mike rose and turned, Barrett moved with that cat-like swiftness which had so often served him and saved him. The silken scarf, weighted with the knife, whipped about Mike's throat. There was no warning in its touch. It seemed to be but the trick of a gust of wind, and in the obscurity of the doorway the gesture did not register. The weighted end passed over Mike's shoulder as Barrett sidestepped, seized the enfolded penknife with his left hand, and at the same time put all his weight behind his right, which grasped the free end of the scarf. Cut off before it was spoken, and the sharp cracking sound meant nothing to Sam Carver, least of all that Mike's neck had been broken. All in one flashing instant, one fluent, continuous, deadly swift gesture. Had there been a blow, a shot, an outcry, Carver would have acted at once. He sensed that something deadly and inexplicable had happened before his eyes, but he had also to reconcile his intuition with the knowledge that Barrett's plays had always been accompanied by the flash of steel, the jetting flame of pistols, the impact of hard-driving fists. He lost an instant before he clubbed his pistol, so that, in accordance with orders, he would not kill the $50,000 prisoner. And that instant sufficed for Mike's body to catapult out of the darkness, drive Carver crashing back against the wall. Then savage fingers closed about his throat as the first blow of his pistol butt struck Mike's limp body to the ground. Carver writhed and struggled, smote blindly at the enemy within his guard. His feet were tramping on a man's body. "Mike!" he contrived to gasp hoarsely before his breath was utterly cut off. Barrett's fingers sank relentlessly home. Lee Simpson's severed finger lent a murderous fury to Barrett's constricting grasp. He followed Carver to the paving. The blows of the pistol butt had ceased. Hours ago, it seemed. Finally, he relaxed his grip, drew a deep breath, realized for the first time that glancing, misdirected blows had battered his head and shoulders. Barrett stretched out on the cold paving, dazed by his exertions and the slaying frenzy and the destructive nervous tension of his lightning assault. In a moment, however, he recovered. He was trembling violently, seeking to reassemble the elements of the suddenly devised scheme. Then it all came back to him. But before going about what he intended to do, he paused to search the two who lay on the floor of the deep doorway recess. Dead, not merely out. He scrutinized the contents of their pockets piece by piece. "Here's the touch," he exclaimed, as by the light of the fountain pen flash lamp, fortunately undamaged, he read the notation on a slip of paper in feminine script. Norma, Maine 7771. Perfect. That and Mike full of lead, was Barrett's thought as he leaped to the coupe. Ought to convince him I'm dead, and Sam skipped with the ransom. Now let's see what they'll have at Pontchartrain Junction. Barrett headed for the first city station beyond the main L&N depot. Simpson, in view of Barrett's supposed death, would have no further vengeance appeal for Maroney. But if Maroney suspected that it was not Barrett who was at the wheel of the flame-warped sedan, Barrett was grateful that he knew of several readily accessible public phones, which were inconspicuous. There was one on Decatur Street, across from the French Market coffee stall, made to order. He called John Healy at his residence. "I've been bumped off. You'll find my body at Munn and Choptula Streets," he informed the chief of detectives. "Land on Maroney and his boys for killing me. Right now. And for God's sake, shake it up. Stick to that story. It's foolproof, and it's Simpson's head if it flops." Barrett smacked the receiver into place and drove on. That'll keep him off of Lee, wherever he is. Barrett, whose successful campaigning had in the past been largely dependent on the proper interpretation of underworld whispers, had heard of Sam Carver's interest in Norma. Garrulity is the most fatal affliction in the racketeer. Thus, though Barrett inferred that Carver's interest had blossomed beyond mildness, he was not certain enough to predict her attitude toward Carver's supposed proposition. She might be loyal to Maroney, in which case there would be a reception committee awaiting Carver, as represented by Davis P. Barrett. But that was a chance that could not be avoided. Barrett parked in a side street, and taking full advantage of the darkness along the L&N tracks, made a careful reconnaissance. His wearing Carver's gray suit made him a good target, and Barrett was still uncertain as to what and who would meet him. He saw a cab pull up across the tracks, heard the door slam, and watched its taillight disappear. The passenger was a woman, and she was approaching the deserted station. The waiting room was in darkness, save for a single feeble globe. By its dim glow, he recognized the shapely figure, exotic coiffure, and graceful, confident gait of Norma Arredondo as she crossed the threshold. Bait. Live bait. Who else might be there? Live bait it is, he told himself as he advanced. But which one of us? The girl who had been watching his approach emerged to meet him. She barely suppressed a cry of alarm as she realized that Sam Carver's gray suit did not contain Sam Carver. But Barrett's smile reassured her to a degree, so that she was perplexed rather than alarmed. Barrett, whatever he was not a woman killer. Sam didn't kill me, he explained. That was just a handy stall. We made a bargain. Maroney thinks I'm dead. You know where Simpson is. Here's the 20 grand I'm giving you from Sam, if you tell me where my buddy's held prisoner. It caught Norma off guard, but she quickly assimilated it. This money, she said, is your security against Sam. And Simpson's are right, said Barrett. Now you get on that phone and get things going. The minute I know that Simpson is in the clear, you get the money. And don't worry about Sam. Maroney can't touch him. Dirty trick, was Barrett's thought, as he caught a significant light in Norma's eyes. She likes Carver, plenty. But the memory of Simpson's severed finger stilled his qualms, and steeled him to carry on with his playing on the girl's obvious affection for Carver. But he'll know that you're not dead, she objected. No. Mike's doubling for me. Sam didn't trust him, so... He made a gesture of finality. Norma understood, despite her connection with the racket. She was for a moment taken aback by the grimness of Sam Carver's subterfuge. As she paused for words, Barrett suddenly realized that he had been off guard for a moment, that his keen attention had relaxed. He glanced over his shoulder, caught a metallic glint, and before Norma could utter the words that were on her lips, Barrett's hand shot forward, not to his holster, but to the girl, striking her to the floor as Barrett himself plunged forward. He made it with a split second to spare. A drumming fusillade rattled through the silence and sent the panes beyond them splintering and tinkling to the floor. "Wiggle clear!" hissed Barrett as he whipped his prone body to cover and flashed his pistol into line. The gunner was momentarily off guard and certain that his volley had dropped Barrett and Norma, but the smack of Barrett's pistol sent him pitching backward. Another, coming from cover, returned Barrett's fire, spattering him with wood splinters, but doing no damage. "Come out and take it, Carver," said a voice, "or we'll chop the dump down and the Jane will get it too." Smack, and a grunt of pain. "Spill it," urged Barrett in a low voice. "Don't be fussy about ratting. Can't you see somebody tapped your line and Maroney's out for you and Sam?" A siren screamed in the distance. Barrett's pistol fire, now more accurate, halted the charge before it got a fair start. "Here's the note you gave Sam. That proves I'm on the level." He emptied his pistol and drew the other salvaged weapon. Help was close, but the enemy could stick to the last second and still make a getaway. Some of them were slipping around to attack from the rear. "Come across!" he barked above the deadly chatter of the automatic and the splintering of glass and wood. "You can't get away with this. You got to leave town, and 20 grand, crack, crack, is a good stake." "The Carlotta, opposite Jackson Ferry," she replied. "Phone the police," commanded Barrett as he jammed home a fresh clip, wondering as he did so whether he could hold the rush. But the arrival of the police patrol spared Barrett the test. As the melee subsided, John Healy entered the station, alone. "You jackass," he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me you were throwing a party here?" "Cops hanging around would have crabbed the works. Send some men to the Carlotta. Get Simpson, and tell your outfit Sam Carter's here, dead. Don't let anyone get wise." Healy was perplexed, but he asked no questions. "Duvall, McCarthy," he bellowed, "get this and hop to it." He repeated Barrett's instructions, then added, "Don't lose a second. I'll hold this down. To hell with what's in here. Hurry, damn it." As the patrol car took off with a roar and a clash of gears, Healy turned to Barrett. "Lord, Dave," he said, seeing Barrett's drawn, white features, white as his tropic tan allowed. "Did they get—" "No, didn't plug me. Much. But if anything slipped, Lee Simpson." Healy's eyes opened wide as Farrell explained a few things. "But I don't quite understand," he protested. "You're dumb," snapped Barrett, giving him a hard glance. And then, "Norma, you don't have to wait here until Lee's in the clear. Here's the dough. We'll drive to the airport and get you out of town right now." "But if we found Mike Tomaso's body in a phone booth," Healy persisted, ignoring Barrett's murderous gaze. "Not in your burned-up car. Who—" Norma's slender form jerked as from an electric shock. Her features twitched from the horror of sudden understanding. Then her hand flashed forward. 4 packets of bills caught Barrett full in the face. "You dirty hijo de puta," she said with a deliberation that made the words even deadlier than they're coming from a woman's lips. Barrett nodded. Healy seized her wrists. "I feel like one, Norma," he said solemnly. "But Lee Simpson was my friend. I had to do it. Now you get out of town and take this dough. Call it insurance money. Anything you please." "You big sap, you giving her all that jack?" demanded Healy. His voice boomed above Norma's low, terribly calm reiterations of hatred and contempt and grief, grotesquely mingled. Barrett started to answer, then changed his mind. He hardly expected the detective to understand his feelings regarding the evening's strategy. "I hope they've killed him," shrieked Norma, her calmness breaking. The telephone in the closest booth rang. Healy, who'd given his men the number, snatched the receiver. He listened for a moment, and during that moment, Barrett felt strangely empty and futile. He poised himself on the balls of both feet. His fists were clenching painfully tight. He forced himself not to think of anything. "All clear, Dave," roared Healy's voice after several age-long seconds. "Simpson's okay." Barrett slowly exhaled the breath he'd been holding. He listened again to Norma's invective, once more low-voiced, and he smiled, shook his head. "John, drive her out to the airport and see she gets out of town. Charter a plane if necessary, but get her out, or her life's not worth a dime." He hitched his belt, redistributed the weight of the emptied pistols, and shrugged as he heard the grief-stricken girl's final appraisal of him. "C'est la guerre," or something like that. "They oughtn't to have used live bait."
You just heard Live Bait by E. Hoffmann Price, narrated by Stephen Howell. I know this is only issue 9, but I can't help but look back over some of the ground we've covered so far with Protecting Project Pulp. We've done, in no particular order, adventure, weird science, fantasy, nature, sci-fi, boxing, flying, lost worlds, and crime. And we haven't even touched on horror, war stories, or westerns yet. And that's not even the whole catalog of genres embraced by the pulp fiction, movement? Revolution? I mean, what do you call it when the whole face of literature changes forever and the seeds of greatness are planted by writers who had no idea of the impact their words would have on future generations? I don't know, because it's not like anyone sat down and said, "We need a new literary form." No one was trying to change the world or champion a cause. It was just a perfect storm of circumstances that aligned in such a perfect way that they engendered something truly amazing. I guess, if you look at it that way, Pulp Fiction was an accident. I mean, history lets us give it a label and box it up all neat and tidy. But really, it's just a sloppy mess of random events and desires that cascaded down the time stream and created something fabulous. There's something important in that, I think. Something comforting and hopeful. I mean, I look at my life and I see a sloppy mess of random events cascading down my own personal time stream. Maybe you do the same. And like me, you think, what the hell? I got to get control of this. It's my life, after all. But you know what? I think getting control of your life is an illusion. Because your life takes place in a very big place filled with a lot of other people. And maybe they're trying to get control too. And if everybody's trying to control everything, oy vey. Nobody was in charge of the pulp fiction movement. Nobody was in control. It just happened because everyone was, as Joseph Campbell so eloquently put it, following their bliss. The magazine companies were loving making their money, and the readers were loving the stories in those magazines, and the writers were loving making those stories. So if you and I just keep pursuing the things we love, then that sloppy mess of events will align again and again and again and make something fabulous. Now, if your bliss happens to be writing science fiction, then I've got a fabulous opportunity for you. You've heard of Joe Haldeman, right? The Forever War? Yeah, this guy is one of the icons of sci-fi writing. I mean, he was just inducted into the Sci-Fi Hall of Fame, so I think I'm pretty safe in saying that. Well, our fearless producer, Tony Smith, has put together a golden opportunity for anyone who wants to learn about writing science fiction. It's a live online lecture titled How to Write Science Fiction with Joe Haldeman. This is a front row seat to hear one of the most celebrated minds in science fiction talk about his journey in the genre. And you can be there as Joe shares the kind of personal advice and anecdotes that never seem to make it into the writer's guides. This is one of those bright, shining opportunities you don't want to let pass you by. There's a link in the show notes, and I recommend you click it and check it out. Now, each week, Protecting Project Pulp is brought to you by the tireless efforts of a truly nefarious pack of shadow dwellers. Our assistant editor, Fred Heimbaugh, is a hard-nosed button man, always packing heat as he walks the back alleys and gin joints, rousting stories and strong-arming the archives for the big pulp fiction payoff we share with you each episode. Tom O'Dwyer is our sound engineer, applying his own brand of backstreet justice to the audio tracks, a combination of finesse and brute force with brass knuckles to make all the stories sing sweet and true. And our editor and producer, Tony Smith, well, let's just say you don't want to cross him unless you have an affinity for concrete shoes and deep dives in the Hudson River. We hope you enjoyed this week's story. And remember, you don't got to shake down a mark to get quality pulp fiction every week. Just subscribe to us on iTunes or at our website, www.protectingprojectpulp.com. And I wanted to say thank you. Some of you have been taking advantage of the comment section there, and it's great to hear what you think of the show and your own insights on the stories. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Now, next week, do you recognize the name Cordwainer Smith? Yeah, baby. It's time to roll up with some classic sci-fi by the pulp master himself with a little tale titled A Game of Rat and Dragon. Until then, I'm your host, Dave Robison. And you know, greatness isn't a goal. It's a symptom. It's a natural side effect of people just doing what they love with all their heart. Today's accidents are tomorrow's wonders. So just follow your bliss. The rest will take care of itself. I'll see you next week. This presentation has been brought to you by the District of Wonders Network, dedicated to podcasting the finest genre fiction. You can learn more about the District of Wonders and their many literary productions at their website, www.districtofwonders.com. Thank you for listening.